You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 1st of August 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead, we begin with a roundup of news from Myanmar, where the military junta has extended the state of emergency for 6 months. Then we'll be in Turkey as Ankara tries once again to normalise ties with Yerevan. But given the tension with Armenia has been going on for decades, can these really make any headway? Then...
I'm white, I'm a dude, and I'm for Harris. I can see her being president. I'm so excited. A woman president, man. How exciting.
Jeff Bridges, famous for playing the dude, is just one of the famous faces joining tens of thousands raising money and organising as part of White Dudes for Kamala. Will this help Democrats fight back against the MAGA movement amongst working class male voters? Matt Wolfe will join us with his theatre recommendations. Plus...
Well, I still have pride in the company I used to work for. This new company is not really recognizable as the same company.
We'll examine how troubled Boeing has evolved through the years and why its reputation is now so tarnished. And finally, we'll join our friends at Maison Alliance to hear what's coming up in Monocle in Paris. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. The man accused of masterminding the 9/11 attacks, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and 2 of his accomplices held at Guantanamo Bay have agreed to plead guilty. Russian missile troops held drills on one of the disputed Kuril Islands, which Japan considers its own territory. And a Canadian warship passed through the Taiwan Strait in what Ottawa called a commitment to an open Indo-Pacific. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, the Myanmar military first put the country under emergency rule for a year when it took power in a February 2021 coup, deposing the elected civilian government of Aung San Suu Kyi and triggering nationwide street protests that it violently crushed. It has extended every 6 months since then and announced a further period yesterday as it struggles to maintain power. Well, let's unpack this further with Dr. Bill Hayton, who's an Associate Fellow at Chatham House's Asia Pacific programme and an expert on Myanmar. Bill, lovely to have you back on the show. I wonder if we could start by just giving us an update on the current political situation in the country.
Well, it's sort of a dynamic standoff, you might say. You have... the whole range of armed groups fighting against the military, and the majority of the country now is out of the control of the military on a permanent basis. You know, some parts are clearly controlled by the armed organisations, some are sort of contested, and there's a sort of small area in the middle which the military have total control of. But it changes, and so the groups going backwards and forwards, different attacks, the front lines changing, all the rest of it. But it's a situation that I think has changed greatly from how people thought it was going to play out after the coup happened just over 3 years ago. And now you have insecurity across the whole country.
And how united are those various military groups?
Well, they're sort of united by the fact that they don't like the army, and army-ruled Myanmar. But beyond that, they're not that united. You get sort of tactical alliances between different groups, but they have different outcomes. And really what this comes back to is whether you see Myanmar as a single country or some kind of federation with all these different groups around it. And whether the dominant ethnic group, the Bama, are willing to share power and be part of a federation, or whether they want this sort of this unitary state where everybody pledges allegiance to a central Myanmar Burma identity. And that really is a question that has been open right from the foundation of the country up to now. So when you look at the geography of Myanmar, there's a major river that runs down the middle, the Irrawaddy or Irrawaddy, and then you have the hills all around it on the country's borders, which are where the ethnic groups live, and that they don't feel really connected to this lowland culture. And so that's a tension that's been in Myanmar, all the way back, for decades, even centuries, I suppose.
What's the current economic situation?
Well, pretty poor. I mean, Myanmar was already the poorest country in ASEAN, which takes quite a lot of doing to be poorer than Laos and Cambodia on a per capita basis. And they were... but things had been getting better up until the coup. But really, all the gains that the economy had made since 2015 have now been lost. The economy is growing tinily, about 1% economic growth, something like that. But you've got a third of the population living in poverty. Exports, imports are down. Smuggling is rife. So the economy is by far the slowest growing economy in Southeast Asia at the moment, and all kinds of problems are getting worse. Myanmar is exposed to cyclones, and its preparedness for that kind of stuff is very poor at the moment.
There's meant to be an election coming up. Previous elections have been postponed because of ongoing violence, or at least that's what the military say. I wonder how they're preparing for the election and if indeed it will go ahead.
I would be very surprised indeed. I mean, I think the military would like to have an election because they want the veneer, at least, of respectability, and say, look, we are abiding by the Constitution, and we've only temporarily suspended it. In the sense that in the same way we've just seen this renewal of the suspension of the Constitution for 6 months rather than a cancellation of it. So the army is trying to sort of give the appearance that it's behaving within the law and the Constitution, but they know that they can't. There are huge areas of the country where they simply couldn't run an election, and even if they could, they would absolutely lose. So I don't see this really going anywhere. So we're in a sort of stalemate, really, that the army is absolutely unprepared to share power or enter negotiations with the opposition. The opposition, I think that they can somehow win, but the army, is despite having sort of retreat into its core areas, if you like, is still powerful and is still being supplied with large amounts of weapons by Russia and by China and by other states. So I think the army think they can win. The ethnic armed organizations think they can win. And so I unfortunately I foresee the conflict dragging on for a few maybe years yet.
Now we've just recently seen aerial photographs which have come to light of bombed out buildings and land. Do we know any detail on this?
Well, the army have been using airstrikes and helicopter strikes for quite some time. So there are all kinds of reports coming from different places. It's very hard, to get quick information from a lot of these places. You often have to wait for people to walk out of these areas and cross the border into Thailand before we find out what's going on.
There's also reports of people fleeing conscription, and I wonder where they're going. Thailand obviously is one of those places.
Yeah, I mean, Thailand and Laos, the two countries that border Myanmar to the east, and Thailand has long been the country that people from Myanmar have fled to because the economy is more dynamic and people have been able to get jobs there. But increasingly we're seeing people fleeing into India and Bangladesh as well. And if it were, there's the Chinese border has long been porous for certain groups that are on that border. But that's also now a difficult issue. So this is one issue, reason why the Southeast Asian countries, might want to take a greater interest in the situation in Myanmar than they have been doing up until recently, is because things are starting to go over the border. Migration flows, drugs, other illegal activities. the Southeast Asian countries have really not done that much to try to end the fighting in Myanmar.
I mean, it was a priority at the recent ASEAN conference, but nothing really came of it.
Yeah, so straight after the coup, just over 3 years ago, ASEAN came up with what it calls this 5-point consensus, which was about having a special envoy to go and engage with all concerned parties, as they phrased it, and to focus on humanitarian aid. But really, nothing much has happened. Each time the ASEAN chair passes from one country to the next each year, a new special envoy is appointed, and they have a different approach to the previous one, and the ASEAN countries are divided as to whether to impose, for example, an arms embargo. They don't want to interfere too, directly in the country. They want to sort of mediate some kind of solution. But they seem to be being played by the Myanmar junta here. Really not. They're being used as an excuse, really. And the army are not engaging with the armed groups, not really engaging with ASEAN, not making any concessions. So it might be time for ASEAN to rethink that.
And what is the humanitarian situation in these migrant camps on the borders and in neighbouring countries?
I mean, it's grim. I mean, you've got lots of people fleeing over the borders. There are calls for international aid, but they're, given everything else that's going on in the world, global attention is not focused on Myanmar at the moment. You've got a lot of people with nowhere to go, and the governments of the countries that they're arriving in are not so keen on encouraging more people to flee, so they're not going to prioritise it either. So, yeah, people are being trapped in pretty poor conditions.
Dr. Bill Hayton, thank you very much indeed. This is The Globalist. It is just coming up to 10:12 in Yerevan. That's 7:12 here in London. Since 1915, there's been tension between Turkey and Armenia, mostly pertaining to the 1.5 million Armenians who Yerevan says were killed by the Ottoman Empire, the predecessor to modern Turkey. The relationship has never fully recovered, and there have been many further bumps along the way. In 1993, Ankara severed diplomatic and commercial relations with Yerevan in support of Azerbaijan during its war with Armenia over the Nagorno-Karabakh region. But now, Turkey and Armenia have resumed talks aiming at normalising the ties. I'm joined by Monocle's Istanbul correspondent Hannah Lucinda Smith to unpick this fantastically complicated situation. Hannah, Turkey's been striving to revive ties with Armenia since this Nagorno-Karabakh conflict ended. Why is it so anxious to do that?
Yeah, I mean, it is the process of normalising these ties has not been kind of linear or easy. It's been going on for quite a number of years. There have been times when it all looks like it's falling apart, and now it appears it's back on track. As you say, the relationship between Turkey and Armenia is complicated, and there are historical factors complicating it. The events of 1915, which of course Armenia and much of the rest of the world calls a genocide, Turkey very, very firmly denies that it was a genocide. That is one of the problems. That's a historical problem. But politically, in modern times, the more serious problem, and the problem which caused the breaking of relations, was this war in the Caucasus following the breakdown of the Soviet Union, the war over the territory of Nagorno-Karabakh, which was a multicultural area during Soviet times. Both Armenians and Azerbaijanis lived there. Following the breakdown of the Soviet Union and the formation of those two states, it was pulled between the two. Now, Turkey is a really strong and staunch ally of Azerbaijan. There are religious reasons for that, cultural reasons, linguistic reasons. Their languages are almost the same. They look at each other as kind of brotherly nations. So when Armenian forces captured that area and took control of it in a situation that would last for 3 decades, for Turkey, that was a red line. As you say, in 1993, the land border was closed, diplomatic relations were cut, and really the two countries were in deadlock. Now, it's not ideal for either country. If you look on the map, They're neighbouring countries. They share a fairly long border. And in Soviet times, again, this was a major trade route. You can still find today the remnants of an old railway line that went from Turkey straight into Armenia, into what's now Armenia. If you talk to people in that area of eastern Turkey, they will tell you about how they remember taking that train to buy things in Armenia and come back, how they had friends on either side of the border. Now, since those relations were cut, the trade routes into the Caucasus from Turkey and vice versa have to take quite a sort of roundabout route to avoid Armenia. If you go to, for example, Turkey's border with Georgia, you will find huge backlogs of trucks trying to cross through, not because they're trying to go to Georgia, but eventually because they're going to go into Georgia and then cross into Armenia. They have to take these really convoluted routes because of geopolitics. So for both countries, there's quite a lot to be gained economically by fixing those ties. And of course, for Turkey, Turkey's economic situation has been deteriorating for a number of years. The government here is trying to do anything that they can to try and bring extra revenue into the coffers. And also Armenia. Armenia geopolitically finds itself in a kind of vulnerable position at the moment. Traditionally, its backer was always Russia, even after the breakup of the Soviet Union. That has changed, particularly in the last year. Armenians feel that Russia did not protect the Armenian population in Nagorno-Karabakh specifically. There were Russian peacekeepers there when Azerbaijan launched its military operation to retake that area. And the former Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has made comments about Russia's actions in Ukraine, called the invasion of Ukraine illegal, says that Armenia doesn't support it, and most recently signed the Rome Statute, which means that it now recognises the International Criminal Court, and if Putin was to visit Armenia, then he would be arrested. So Armenia, let's not forget, it's a small country, it's a poor country, and it's really sort of been left adrift in its region. So it has its own reasons for wanting to fix ties.
So it's been 2 years since they've met. Now the talks are back on. But has any progress been made?
Yeah, so on Monday this week, representatives from the two countries, representatives focused on trade, met at the border. This is the land border that hasn't been opened for more than 3 decades now. They had a photo opportunity walking across a bridge there, and they talked about reopening that border and also about building trade ties. There are already some concrete steps that have been taken. In February 2022. Direct flights were resumed between the two countries. Up until then, if you wanted to go from Turkey to Armenia, which I've done in the past, it was, an incredibly convoluted journey. The quickest way you could do it was to fly to Tbilisi and then go overland to Yerevan. Now you can do that in a couple of hours flight. So there are steps being taken. But really, Azerbaijan's victory in Nagorno-Karabakh last year and the redrawing of those borders in the Caucasus has created this opening for them.
And what does it depend on for all of this just to be finally resolved?
I think it depends on the kind of peace deal that is thrashed out between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Obviously, Azerbaijan holds most of the cards in that conflict now. The international community has basically recognised Nagorno-Karabakh as Azerbaijani territory, which during the 3 decades prior was also the case. I think this is the main reason why there was not much outcry about what happened in the Caucasus over the past few years. But I think a lot depends on how magnanimous Azerbaijan is going to be in that and whether it's going to try and push for more territory. If that's the case, it's going to create no end more tensions in the Caucasus, no end more anger in Armenia. People were incredibly angry there at Pashinyan for what they saw as his just kind of handover of Karabakh to the Azerbaijanis. Unless that peace deal is kind of done in a magnanimous way, I think it's going to create more tensions and put this reconciliation effort a step back again.
And if we look at Turkey's other reconciliation efforts, how likely is it to work? They've not been notably successful in other areas.
Yeah, it's so interesting. When you look back at the beginning of President Erdogan's tenure 20 years ago, there was this foreign policy slogan, no problems with the neighbours. Turkey wanted to project influence in its neighbourhood through soft power and by building good relations, particularly with countries that were once part of the Ottoman Empire, so particularly in the Middle East, with countries like Greece, which is, historically got this long-running dispute with about maritime borders in the Aegean, and also with Armenia. The reconciliation efforts with Armenia stretch right back to 2010. But that policy really fell apart after 2011 and the start of the Arab Spring. That's when President Erdogan and his ministers, some of his ministers at least, decided that they wanted to start pursuing a more muscular foreign policy, getting more heavily involved, including militarily, in other countries' conflicts. And that's created a huge amount of tension. Ultimately, it's led to Turkey being somewhat isolated in its own neighbourhood. And now it's already managed to reconcile with countries like Egypt, with Saudi Arabia, with the UAE. Its reconciliation efforts with Greece are kind of on track. They've been thrown off a little bit this month. There's been a bit of a resumption of tensions. But the big one is Syria. When you turn on the news here in Turkey, for the past month, there have been constant reports about efforts to arrange a meeting between President Erdogan and President Assad as the kind of start of a reconciliation effort. That is going to be the most complicated one. On both sides, there are a huge list of conditions for that reconciliation, and it's really difficult to see how that can be untangled quickly.
Hannah, thank you so much. I love the sound of Turkish dogs in the background there. That was Hannah Lucinda Smith from Istanbul. Now, still to come on the programme.
They have Kid Rock, Kevin Sorbo, and a dolphin aficionado, and we have the Hulk, Samwise Gamgee, Luke Skywalker, and Mayor Pete. That's pretty damn cool.
Are the Democrats fixing Hillary Clinton's biggest mistake of 2016 by using celebrities to directly organise white men for the election? We'll find out. This is The Globalist.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
Coming up to 7:22 here in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. This is The Globalist. It's Monocle Radio, and joining me in the studio is Terry Stiastany, who's a political journalist and an author. Good morning to you, Terry.
Good morning.
Everywhere, most of the front pages are going with this attack on the Hamas leader in Tehran. The FT leads with that story.
Yes, that's right. I mean, their headline in the print edition here is Iran vows revenge on Israel for killing of the Hamas political leader in Tehran. And this is talking about fears, really, that this could escalate into a full-blown war in the region. But it's interesting, there is also an article in the FT which is suggesting that, not surprisingly, EU and US diplomats are going absolutely all out to try to prevent that happening. And there seems to be a huge amount of diplomatic activity in the region. And the Financial Times reporting here that Enrique Mora, one of the EU's most senior diplomats, was holding talks in Tehran on Wednesday, and also at the same time, Brett McGurk, the White House's top official in the Middle East, was in Saudi Arabia. And, they do seem to be extremely worried here, the Western diplomats, and saying that one Western diplomatic source telling the Financial Times that everyone since last night is putting pressure on Tehran not to respond and to contain this. And there does seem to be, obviously, not surprisingly, quite a concern here that this could escalate, and everybody is trying to speak to people on all sides to try and prevent anything escalating further.
And of course, just before that, a senior Hezbollah commander was killed in Beirut. He's now been confirmed as being Fuad Shakur. And of course, that also adds to the whole worry about the region.
Yes, I mean, because there seems to have been, and it's interesting looking at some of, Israel basically took an opportunity because some of these people have been based in Qatar for a while, and because people have travelled travel to Iran to go and attend the presidential inauguration, and that was Israel then saw that as a chance to go in there and assassinate people. But so not surprisingly, this has caused a huge amount of anger in Iran. But you seem to have potential conflicts on lots of different sides, and so hoping that this will not escalate any further. But obviously Israel still pretty feeling that they can do this and that they are able to carry out these kind of strikes that they have often done in the past.
Benjamin Netanyahu says that these are difficult days. He says they're prepared for anything.
Yes, of course. I mean, particularly in reference to the attack in Iran, Israel has not said that they did it, and they have not said not wanted to talk about it any further. But yeah, the attacks seem to be worrying, particularly US officials, that this could tip over, and they're saying that this is one of the most sensitive moments since the 7th of October, and they're saying also that the US didn't have any prior knowledge of these attacks, because obviously that would bring other countries into the picture.
Yeah. Let's go to American politics now, and the entertainment show that keeps on giving. Donald Trump, he's repeated his lies. He's attacked Kamala Harris's racial identity. He was speaking to a panel of black journalists, and it was quite extraordinary.
It was really bizarre, and this is obviously a controversial invitation, and many people at the National Association of Black Journalists have said, well, you shouldn't invite Trump in the first place, and they were pretty upset that he had been invited. But Trump seemed equally upset that he had been invited as well, and ended up pretty much being taken off stage by his own people. The Guardian headline doesn't sort of pull its punches here, saying Trump repeats lies and attacks Kamala Harris's racial identity. He was suggesting that she wasn't really black, so suggesting that she had always thought of herself as Asian rather than black, and then just changed her. She was Indian all the way, and then all of a sudden she became a black woman. The presenter then pushed back, not surprisingly, against that. And the person interviewing him, she kept trying to say, well, this isn't true, that isn't true. He was also saying, for instance, that he had been the best president for the black population since Abraham Lincoln. Apparently there were some people who applauded this as well as people who booed it, and then Donald Trump really did not like being questioned on this, and did not like the interviewer kind of pushing back at him, because he then later on said, first of all, I don't think I've ever been asked a question in such a horrible manner, and then said, accused the presenter of being rude and asking nasty questions, even when she was just putting things to him that members of his own campaign had said.
And that presenter was Rachel Scott. She's a senior congressional correspondent for ABC News, and she started by basically listing a kind of a whole raft of things that Trump has said and done that were untrue, or that were really slurs, racial slurs, and then asked that question, so why should black people vote for you? And it's really worth watching that on TV.
There are various edits of this. I think The Guardian has one that's about 5 minutes, and apparently there are other 10 minutes. If you watch the whole thing, it's just it's very strange. Very strange.
But all credit to the journalist who just really did it straight. And just before the whole thing kicked off, there had been a row about whether Trump would allow fact-checking or not.
Well, yeah, I think that was really interesting. And he turned up, or he was late on stage, because precisely behind the scenes they'd been having this row about whether he would allow his statements to be fact-checked in real time. And so, as you say, Rachel Scott doing her best to try and fact-check as he went on, and obviously pointing out all the instances where things he said just weren't true.
Well, let's stick with fact-checking, because, of course, this has become really important in this incident in Southport here in the UK, where some children and I think a couple of their teachers were stabbed, and then becomes this whole truth, false lie around it, which stokes the violence. Tell us more.
Yes, well, this is really interesting. The Times has done a bit of an investigation into, as you say, some of the misinformation or disinformation around this incident in Southport, which has basically led to demonstrations and rioting, not only in Southport, but then demonstrations outside Downing Street in Westminster, demonstrations in Hartlepool, a lot of far right. The police have said that these were people involved with the far right and how this disinformation has spread. But the Times here is talking about one of the accounts which spread false claims about the suspect, completely untrue claims about who he was. And this says there's an account called Channel 3 Now, which apparently originally started life about 12 years ago, as an obscure news site sharing videos of Russians carrying out drag racing in the snow. It's now apparently based in Pakistan, and its IP is owned by two people in Pakistan, and then it started calling itself Fox 3 Now. Then Fox News sued it, so it had to change its name to Channel 3 Now, registered in Lithuania. And this seems to have put out the false information about the identity of the suspect, and then that was picked up by other accounts. And it's just horrifying, really, how quickly this disinformation can spread. I was one friend of mine who'd been reporting on the riots, was told by people there saying that they believed that BBC and Sky carried blockers to stop other sources of news getting on air and things like that, and people sort of calling themselves journalists who weren't from any kind of reputable organisation, and it's just really worrying how quickly this can spread and incite violence around the country.
Because the bottom line was they were saying that this had been done by an immigrant, by a Muslim. There was a lot of hateful rhetoric being stirred up, and the usual people jumping on it, Tommy Robinson, Andrew Tate, for instance, and just complete and utter lie.
Yes, and people obviously ready to believe it, and it seemed that a lot of people who went to Southport and were, throwing things at police, large numbers, nearly 40 police officers were injured, people's walls and houses were broken and walls pulled down and things like that. And a lot of them had come from outside. They weren't local people protesting. Most of the local people were trying to stop this. They were saying they were scared, and then the next morning were trying to clear up all of the damage that had been done. So people had come in specifically to cause trouble.
Well, let's end with a really good news story.
After something a bit more cheerful. Okay. Yeah. So the Olympics, we're all watching the Olympics, and, even in sports like gymnastics, we're saying, great, a few older people are older, they can now compete at an older age. Simone Biles is 27, one of the British team was 32. For gymnastics, this is quite old. But, it's good to see proper, mature, strong women doing their sports. But there is a 61-year-old competitor in the Olympics, and she has been playing table tennis for Luxembourg. Her name is Ni Jialan, and she was originally, this is an amazing story of a comeback. So she was born in 1963, the oldest competitor in the history of the Olympics to win a table tennis match, and she was beaten by the Chinese world and Olympic silver medalist, but the Grand Duke of Luxembourg gave her a hug. But she had started table tennis, this is an amazing story, when she was a little girl in Shanghai. By the time she was 16, she was on the national team. In 1983, she won 2 gold medals for China at the World Championships in Berlin. But then she moved to study in Germany, moved to Luxembourg, never carried on playing table tennis, but she just, maybe she did it, for fun, but she's come back. And it's her 6th Olympics, and Luxembourg's chosen her to carry the flag for the team in the opening ceremony. And she's well known in Luxembourg, beloved in China, and all the players on the circuit call her auntie as a sign of respect. So there was a different player who's 58, I think, who had given up and came back to it. But now she has carried on to compete in the Olympics at age 61.
Fabulous stuff. Terry, thank you very much indeed. Now here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. The man accused of masterminding the 9/11 attacks, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and 2 of his accomplices held at the US military prison at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, have agreed to plead guilty, the Pentagon said. A US official said the plea deals almost certainly involved guilty pleas in exchange for taking the death penalty off the table. Russian missile troops held drills on one of the disputed Kuril Islands, which Japan considers its own territory, the Interfax news agency cited Russia's defense ministry as saying today. Soviet troops seized the 4 islands off Japan's Hokkaido at the end of World War II, and they've remained in Moscow's hands, preventing the 2 countries signing a peace treaty. And a Canadian warship passed through the Taiwan Strait in what Ottawa called a commitment to an open Indo-Pacific, drawing a rebuke from China that the naval exercise undermined peace. Canada's Defence Ministry said the HMCS Montreal frigate had recently conducted a routine transit through the strait in what its Defence Minister said was a reaffirmation of Canada's commitment to a free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. 2024 has so far been among the worst years in Boeing's history. From January's door plug blowout on a 737 MAX 9 to July's criminal plea deal over fatal crashes in 2018, the aerospace giant keeps racking up bad headlines. Now the company's facing labour unrest from the rank-and-file workers who actually assemble the aircraft. So how did a company that started by making seaplanes out of local timber end up here? Monocle's Seattle correspondent Gregory Scruggs reports.
On a balmy July evening, tens of thousands of unionized workers who belong to the International Association of Machinists, or IAM, packed the stands of Seattle's baseball stadium. The occasion? Their first contract negotiations with Boeing in 16 years.
Boeing makes billions of dollars off your skills, hard work, and dedication to their company. And now you deserve your fair share.
That was John Holden, president of the union branch, covering the nearly 33,000 machinists who build Boeing airplanes in factories throughout the Seattle area. Workers voted 99.9% yes to sanction a strike, though an actual decision to put down their tools won't come until September. As one of the world's two major airplane manufacturers, the Boeing name is known globally. While today the company is headquartered outside Washington, D.C., its brand name, however much recently tarnished, wouldn't exist without the other Washington, Washington State, where a plucky timber baron named William Boeing became enamored of the early days of aviation over 100 years ago. On the shores of Seattle's Lake Union, where Boeing flew his first aircraft, I asked a local historian to fill me in.
My name is Knut Berger. I'm editor-at-large for Cascade PBS here in Seattle, and we are in the Museum of History and Industry on South Lake Union, and we're standing in a room full of models of Boeing planes, and outside we can see one of the original Boeing planes, the first plane to carry mail, international mail, between Seattle and British Columbia. The original Boeing planes were made out of local substances, like the Boeing plane out here is made of cedar and Sitka spruce. These were natural things that grew here, and they were used in shipbuilding and other things. And the company just began to innovate and grow, and Bill Boeing was a wealthy relatively young man who could finance essentially what was a hobby that became a major industry.
And to what extent, especially during the war years, did Boeing's industrial might mint the Seattle region as a kind of economic powerhouse?
We had access to things like steel and aluminum manufacture at scales that were very large. And so as demand for aircraft grew, that demand could be met and be by local means. Inexpensive hydropower drove a lot of that innovation. World War II came along, and the demand for aircraft was enormous, both domestic, fighting the Allies. The Boeing B-17 factory was down on the Duwamish, and Boeing Plant 2, which was practically a city unto itself. And in Boeing Plant 2, during World War II, where they're making B-17 flying fortresses, there were 30,000 people employed in that one building. So you can imagine the kind of employment impact, the wartime impact, and that really set the company to a dimension of production that then set it up to be able to enter the era of jet aviation.
One of the countless Boeing workers during the jet era was Ron McKay, who spent 4 decades as a toolmaker. A few weeks before the machinists authorized a potential strike, I met him during a barbecue at the IAM's Seattle Union Hall, just a stone's throw from one of Boeing's many factories.
I hired in 1965, and I left in 2005. It was very, very interesting work, development of tooling for all the new airplanes as they came along. And in those days, the tooling, people that worked in tooling were sort of a protected class in that when the downturns would happen between airplanes, they kept us on the payroll because they knew they would need us for the next program.
Boeing had both ups and downs. The collapse of the supersonic jet program led to mass layoffs in the early 1970s, known infamously as the Boeing bust. But it offered a promising career for many workers during the company's 20th century heyday.
We had medical, we had dental, we had retirement benefits. So it was a very comfortable living and resulted in a very comfortable retirement.
Those are the kinds of benefits that union workers are now fighting to get back.
Retirement that was stolen from us January 3rd, 2014!
In a statement after the vote, Boeing said, quote, "We are committed to building a strong future for our team, our company, and the Pacific Northwest communities where we live and work. With that focus in mind, we look forward to this year's negotiation between Boeing and the IAM." Boeing declined Monocle's request for an interview. Now comfortably retired, McKay looks back wistfully at his 40 years on the factory floor. Do you still have pride in the company that you once worked for?
Well, I still have pride in the company I used to work for. This new company is not really recognizable as the same company. The subcontracting that's gone on in recent years, it's hard to really say what is a Boeing airplane because there's so many other hands involved in it that it's just another airplane.
With hundreds of workers milling about at the Union Hall, many with families in tow who rely on the steady paycheck from building airplanes, I asked McKay what message he has for the younger machinists.
Boeing was a very reliable company. You could depend on its products. You could depend on their word when we were in contract negotiations. If we didn't always agree, but you could always rely on their word as to whatever position they were taking. You could, it could be relied on. And I think the main thing that is missing from Boeing now is being able to stand up and with a bit of pride and say, I built that. And because now we build pieces of it, and we don't build the whole product. And I really feel bad for the newer generation that cannot say, I really built something.
For Monocle in Seattle, I'm Gregory Scruggs.
Many thanks to Greg. This is Monocle Radio. It is 2:42 in Washington, D.C., 8:42 in Zurich. A whole host of identity groups have been hosting fundraisers on Zoom to support the presidential campaign of Kamala Harris. Win with Black Men, Latino men for Kamala, South Asian men for Harris, White Women Answer the Call 2024, and even Pet Lovers for Kamala. Well, on Monday, another group met, White Dudes for Harris. The call raised $4 million for her, though it's not directly affiliated with her campaign. For some, the name of the group was offensive. Ross Morales Roquetto, who's one of the organisers, said, I don't blame them. Throughout American history, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that when white men organise, it's often with pointy hats on, and it doesn't end well. Well, we're joined now by Dr. Mitchell Robertson, who's a lecturer at UCL's Centre on US Politics. Many thanks for coming on the show. I wonder if we could address that uncomfortable aspect first. Why not all men for Harris?
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me. I mean, I think what we need to look at this is a gimmick. It's quite remarkable. In fact, we're talking about a US presidential campaign fundraising event on the radio here in London. So I think that the campaign itself, the official Harris campaign, will be reaching out to all voters. But these recent Zoom calls, I think, are just a bit of a gimmick. They raise a lot of money and they raise a lot of awareness.
How important, though, is the white male electorate in the US?
I mean, it's very important to the Republican Party. I mean, it's an interesting fact of US history that the Democrats haven't won the white male vote since 1964. So this is a long-running trend that we're seeing in US politics. This is not something that's happened in the last 2 or 3 election cycles. So they'll be looking to make gains. Biden did a lot better amongst white men in 2020 than Hillary Clinton did in 2016. But I don't think anyone realistically thinks the Democrats are going to win the white male vote in this upcoming election.
Really? Why is that?
I mean, that's a big question that a lot of ink has been spilled over. I think there is some of the appeals to racial politics by the Republican Party, I think, is undeniable. There's also been the erosion of support broadly amongst the working class for the Democratic Party. I mean, it's very difficult to answer these questions without sort of assigning kind of racial motives, but there's been a precipitous decline in white male support for the Democratic Party as it's seen the weakening of support amongst traditional unions and things like that. So this has been a long-running feature of US politics.
I mean, is it that young boys are in need of positive role models in the wake of the toxic masculinity of various alt-right media stars? We've been talking earlier in the show about Andrew Tate and even Trump himself. And I wonder how that can be addressed. Is this kind of gimmicky campaign perhaps the way to challenge the misogyny of Trump and Vance and so on?
Yeah, I think that really is, and sort of bringing a bit of levity into it in some ways. I think what's interesting about this call is, you know, with Mark Hamill, the Star Wars actor, and Bradley Whitford from The West Wing, they're kind of having a bit of a laugh at themselves. I think they're sort of not taking this sort of identity politics too seriously, saying, "Haha, we're white dudes for Harris, and we're here to raise some money." It's not sort of taking themselves so seriously, and I think it really does provide a positive antidote to those much more toxic traits that you mentioned earlier in your question.
I mean, how important is it then to have celebrities spearheading these kinds of campaigns?
I mean, it's a very interesting question, and we can think back, even going back a few weeks now. It seems like a lifetime, doesn't it, to the George Clooney op-ed in the sort of last days of the Biden administration. I mean, I think these don't. I mean, I don't think anybody says, "Oh, Mark Hamill's voting for Kamala Harris, so I'm going to vote for Kamala Harris." But they generate a bit of buzz. They say, "Hey, something's going on here in this campaign." I think what's been really noticeable over the last week in the Harris campaign has been this burst of excitement, contrasted with the sort of seeming low energy of the last couple of weeks of the Biden campaign. So I think these do make a difference in that, you know, you're reading every morning, "Oh, they raised $4 million last night. Oh, they broke the Zoom record. Oh, they broke the Zoom record again," for Harris supporters. So I think these make a difference. I don't think that people necessarily will change their mind, you know, just because Mark Hamill or somebody from the West Wing tells them to vote a certain way. But also people will tune into things because there are celebrities. And this has been a tactic that's been used for a long, long time, going back to 2016, you know, having Bruce Springsteen and Beyonce at Hillary Clinton rallies, physical rallies. People will turn up to hear them, and then they get a message, and hopefully they do go out to vote. I think that's also what's going on here, that they turn up, maybe they're turning up to hear Mark Hamill, but they get some information about some events happening. Maybe they throw in a couple of bucks to the campaign, and that really does give momentum to these presidential campaigns.
Thank you very much indeed. That's Dr. Mitchell Robertson, a lecturer at UCL's Centre on US Politics. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
It's time now to talk theatre with the critic at the International New York Times. That's Matt Wolfe, who joins us in the studio. Good morning to you, Matt.
Good morning to you, Georgina.
You are American.
I think, yes.
Therefore, we fundamentally disagree on the way that the play we want to discuss is pronounced.
I know. Yes. I would say, as I think John Steinbeck probably said when he wrote it in 1939, the novel The Grapes of Wrath, made into a famous John Ford film, now a play, but the British say Rolfe.
Yeah. Well, tell us about the show.
Well, it's interesting. It was actually seen at the National before in 1989 in a fully American production from Chicago. This is largely a British production directed by Carrie Cracknell with the wonderful Cherry Jones, brought over from the States to play Ma Jode. It's about a group of Oklahoma sharecroppers who are caught up in the Dust Bowl and end up migrating to California. A really hard-scrabble, grim, rough life. It's interesting because, of course, there are all sorts of connections between then and now. Tent cities, people on the move, economic despair, dispossession. And the production, I think, at times points that up a little too much. I wish they would just let the material sort of be without kind of drumming home then and now are sort of the same thing. And it takes a while to get going. It's quite bitty and episodic in the first half, but in the second half, once the narrative really starts to grip, it's very compelling. And it's a real triumph for the design team led by Alex Eels, who's the set designer, because you've got to sort of recreate the sort of dusty, windswept vistas of America on the National Theatre stage, and they do it very well.
Let's move on to Slave Play, which is interesting because we've just been talking about White Dudes for Kamala.
Yes. Yes.
And this play has courted controversy because of its blackout performances.
Yes, I have to say I'm a little puzzled by the controversy it caused because they had the blackout performances in New York and nobody batted an eyelid, so I'm not quite sure why the British got so hot under the collar about it. It even got up to governmental, levels of debate. That had to do with basically safe spaces for black audiences in this country to watch a play in which race is absolutely the subject of the play. It's a bait and switch topic, and spoiler ahead, but I think most people now know what the spoiler is. You think that you're watching a play about the sexual relations amongst three couples in the antebellum South, and then about half an hour or so in, you realize that that's all performative, and you're actually watching them enacting a kind of sex therapy process happening in the here and now, which is being supervised by two therapists who are themselves a couple. And the whole thing unfolds 2 hours, no interval, and it's really about sort of power dynamics, subjugation, racial, and also sexual accommodation. It has as much, I think, to say about how we define ourselves in terms of intimacy, regardless of race. But then when you add race to the mix, it becomes quite potent. I should say a shout out to the cast. It's 4 people from the original Broadway production, and then 4 people who've been brought in for London, one of whom is Olivia Washington, the daughter of Denzel. She's very good. But Kit Harington, of course, Game of Thrones, is in it as an ensemble member, not an above-the-title star, and he's absolutely terrific in it. There's no grandstanding, no showboating. He's one of the company and very commendable.
And finally, let's have a quick look at the proms.
Well, yes, I always love the proms, and you might think, what do they have to do with theatre? Well, in fact, they often have quite a bit to do with theatre. The John Wilson Orchestra often performs. This year, there's a wonderful orchestrator, arranger, and composer, Simon Hale. He won a Tony Award for Girl from the North Country. He will be conducting Sam Smith, the non-binary performer Sam Smith, in their only appearance, apparently, in the UK this year, which is on August 2nd, tomorrow. And it's very interesting if you follow New York and London theatre. Simon is doing the score for this new musical, The Artist, based on the Oscar-winning movie, but he will be on the podium with Sam Smith tomorrow night.
And you know what? I can't let you go without having a quick chat about Hello, Dolly.
I'm tempted to burst into song, but I think that would be unfair to Dame Imelda, from whom one wants to steal no thunder.
But you are looking swell.
Oh, excuse me. I left my red dress at home. But anyway, Imelda Staunton is really a phenomenon. I think it's fair to say that she is probably now the first lady of the British theatre. And what's interesting is whatever she puts her hand to, Sondheim, Chekhov, Shakespeare, Edward Albee, it seems to be a fit. Here she's playing, of course, Dolly Gallagher-Levi, the famous matchmaker. And what's wonderful is she sings the songs, of course, but she really acts the part of this woman widowed who has withdrawn from life, wants a way back in, and she finds it at the Harmonia Gardens, and the audience is in her thrall at every minute.
Matt, thank you so much. That's Matt Wolfe there. And this is The Globalist on Monocle Radio. finally, let's head to Paris to join the Monocle team there, who are in place to bring you 2 weeks of live radio from the heart of the Olympic city. Emma Nelson joins me now from Maison Alliance to tell us what will be in the show at the top of the hour. Bonjour, Emma.
Bonjour, Georgina. How's it going back in London? We're missing you. We can hear your voices as we're just about to start the programme. And we think, oh, hello, London. How's it going?
It's going very well. We've now got Vincent back here with us. And of course, he was with you in Paris. So it's lovely. He's been telling us exactly how the setup works there. And we have a much clearer picture of what you're doing over there now.
When Vinny went to all the good games as well, he absolutely did a clean sweep of all the amazing locations. So we are pretty jealous, actually, that by the time that he turned up to join us in the studio, he had seen all the great places. And actually, that's what we're talking about today on the radio, because it's been widely reported that Paris and the French were very keen not to build too much. Sort of almost like an artificial legacy of construction when it came to the Olympics. And what they did is they have played very hard on using what they have. And their preparation has been to revive, rebuild, and just bring back some amazing French landmarks. We're going to be talking to the man behind the restoration of the Grand Palais, which is this huge, beautiful exhibition hall, more than a century old. They've redone it, and anybody who's been watching they're going to see the taekwondo, but anybody who's been watching the fencing will know that magnificent glass roof, that is all restored and ready. So this is the kind of stuff that we're focusing on today. It's the readiness and it's the preparedness of Paris as I think we're seeing it sort of come into fruition now. We're in full swing. It's almost as if Paris has only ever had the Olympics all the time. They've become very, very happy bedfellows. And so that's what we'll be talking about today.
Excellent. Now, you're also looking at the issue of giving a voice to those who don't have a country to represent.
It's funny. You think that when it comes to the Olympics, one of the most important things is that the athletes who compete under the umbrella of their nation, and when you sometimes wonder how much they're actually thinking about whether they're going to get that gold medal for Guatemala as they're embarking upon their competition, whether it's all about personal bests. But at the end of the day, as we saw as we see in every single Olympics, it's about countries representing themselves to the rest of the world and having a lovely golden light shone on them for a split second in history. The trouble is that if you are a refugee, you no longer have that country to protect you. So there are 36 Olympians this year who are part of the Olympic refugee team, and they are they're sort of helped and pooled together. And we're talking to a man called Manon Dave in just a few minutes' time, who's actually been tasked with creating a piece of music for them, because it's one of those important things that if you don't have a flag, you don't have an identity, you need something to make things a little bit more coherent. So we'll be hearing from that in just a few minutes' time.
Now, that sounds really fascinating. I suppose exactly, you've got to create your own flag for them, your own national anthem, the whole sort of identity. Really, really interesting. I will certainly be tuning in for that. Finally, let's hear what you're going to be saying on perfume.
Oh, yes. Now, this is a dreadfully difficult subject that I'm very much I'm looking forward to it like anything. We'll be hearing from a very lovely man called Baptiste Bouygues. He has assured me that he has a bag of very beautiful scent in his he brought a rather beautiful leather bag into the studio. And we are discussing the challenges of discussing perfume on the radio when you can't smell it. But he's the founder of a perfumery called Orme, and they're playing on the fact that Paris's heritage as arguably the perfume centre of the world is something that is incredibly important now and can be used to build a sort of an identity for Paris for the future as well. There is absolutely no sign of the perfume world diminishing at all. We're going to be talking about that a little bit later too.
So interesting. Emma, what do the Olympics smell like?
Hot. There's the only way I can describe it. When I was in the Parc des Princes on a couple of nights ago, I wouldn't even begin to tell you what what the Olympics smells like at the moment. It's smelling a bit fresh, and it's been raining incredibly hard, so things have been bubbling up. So Paris smells like Paris. That's the only way I'm going to describe it.
Emma Nelson, thank you very much indeed. And that's all we have time for today. Thanks to our producers, Monica Lillis and Vincent McAviney, our researcher, Sana Jimani, and our studio manager, Tamsin Howard, with editing assistance from Flynn Simons. Coming up at the top of the hour, of course, it is Monocle in Paris with Emma. The briefing is live at midday in London, and the Globalist returns at the same time tomorrow. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thanks for listening.